So the next type of function that we are going to look at is nth power and nth root function. So y is equal to x power n and y is equal to x power 1 by n. So how does the graph of this function look like? The graph of this function depends on the value of n. The graph of this function depends on the value of n. We have already seen the examples of n is equal to 2, which is a square function, n is equal to 3, which is a cube function. Now for a general n, so if the graphs look something like this. So if n is even, the value of y is always positive. The graph lies in first and second quadrants. Even for positive x, the value of y is positive. For negative x also, the value of y is positive. This graph comes if n is even. And if n is odd, correspond to positive x, y is positive. Correspond to negative x, y is negative. This graph is obtained when n is odd. So when n is even, you have a graph something like this, which looks like a quadratic graph, but looks slightly fat or thin depending on the value of n. So here, this looks similar to the cubic function. So if n is even, the domain is real numbers and the range is close at 0, infinity. And when n is odd, the domain is real numbers and the range is also real numbers. So that's the difference between the nth power function if n is even and n is odd. Similarly, if you go for y is equal to x power 1 by n. So if n is even, that function will be defined only for positive x's. Because if n is 2, that is root of x, 4th root of x, 6th root of x, so on, will be defined only for positive x's. And the graph will look similar to the square root graph. This is the graph of y is equal to x power 1 by n, if n is even. And if n is odd, x power 1 by n can be calculated for both positive and negative numbers. And the graph will look something like this. This is when n is odd. So when n is even, the domain is 0 to infinity and the range is also equal to 0 to infinity. And if n is odd, the domain and range, both of them will be equal to real numbers. So this is how you analyze nth power function and nth root function.